Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, gymnast Nancy Kiner joins the show. In 2020, while in high school, she placed first in the beam and second in the all-around at Chris Waller's Heart of a Champion meet. In college at George Washington University, she has a career best 9.85 on the beam, achieving this feat on 3 separate occasions. Away from gymnastics, she's also a talented photographer, having her work featured in California at the El Segundo Museum of Art. Her grandfather, Ralph Kiner, is a baseball Hall of Famer who was the only player to lead the American or National League in home runs for 7 straight seasons, and he had his number 4 retired by the Pittsburgh Pirates. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good, how are you doing today?
I'm great. That was like a really awesome introduction. I should carry that around with me and just say that instead of my name.
No problem. I'm glad you liked it. I know you were busy this summer working with the Washington Nationals. What was your role?
I worked as a marketing intern and I got to work under 2 different bosses technically because I got to work as a photographer on game day, which was amazing. But I also got to work within the creative department on the marketing side and do web design and make home plate pads, which you wouldn't even know what goes into that, and all of the different aspects of Illustrator and everything behind the Nationals that goes on within Adobe and Creative Cloud. That was really awesome to learn about. But on game day, I worked as a photographer and I got to go all over the ballpark all summer.
From something that maybe people don't get to see while watching a game, what was something cool that you got to see working as a photographer?
Oh, there were a lot of things. I think that my experience was definitely unique because of my history in athletics, but also because I worked as an athletics photographer here at GW, and I worked with GW Baseball a lot as their main videographer. So being able to see like the difference between college and the MLB was really awesome. But I definitely think that there were a lot of hot days. So when I shot my first game, when we got to the dugout, the EMT came up to me and said my name and that I was a gymnast. And I was so confused because I was like, how do you know me? And yes, I am a gymnast at GW. That's crazy. And he was like, I'm the EMT for the meets. They hire us out when GW's EMTs can't come in. So that was like a cool branch where they was like these 2 very different worlds were colliding.
With your grandfather being such a prominent name in baseball, what's it like to kind of work in the field that he played on?
I definitely think that it helped me be really grateful for where I was. I think my favorite assignment that I got to shoot was Eli Willits when he signed to the Nationals. I got to be a lighting tech because I was able to be in the broadcasting booth and just like looking over the stadium. And I was just thinking about like, this is where my grandfather spent a lot of his favorite times. And my dad spent a lot of time. And my sister even has spent a lot of time in there. So it was just an amazing like 4th wall breaking of me being old enough to realize how awesome the things that he did were.
Before we get too far in here, Chris Waller, who was a gymnast as well, I remember him from the Goodwill games, and I think 1990 maybe. But what is the Heart of a Champion meet, and did you get a chance to work with Chris Waller closely?
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy that you asked this question. Yes, Chris Waller, I didn't get to work with him for long enough. I wish I could have gotten to work with Chris every day of my gymnastics career. But I worked with Chris and 3 other amazing coaches, including his daughter, when I moved to Gym Jam, which is the gym that he used to own out in Santa Clarita, California. The Chris Waller's Heart of a Champion meet is an amazing meet because the family spend a lot of time with Camp Del Corazon, which is a nonprofit that helps kids who have, I believe, heart disease. And they take them to Catalina for a week and they get to have the greatest time. And Chris and his family, Alex and their mom and their sister always go. They go every year. And so the profits that come from that meet all go to Camp Del Corazon.
Oh, that's awesome. So winning the beam at that, there has to be a sense of pride there.
Oh my God, yeah. That was also the first time I won anything. I would like to say that my athletic career was as sparkling as my grandfather's, but it definitely peaked a little later. So that was the first time I had won beam, and I was so excited. I was a senior, I was the only senior on my team, and it was an amazing moment. I'll never forget it.
You win at the beam, you finish second in the all around in February 2020 at the Heart of a Champion meet, and then COVID hits, which halts all momentum. How are you able to keep training?
That's a really awesome question. It was a really complicated process. I originally spent 2 months in Palm Desert, which is where I'm from. Both my parents and my grandparents spent a lot of time out there at the Thunderbird Country Club, and they have a lot of ties there and friendships. My grandmother played tennis out there all the time. So I started training at the gym that I originally trained at, but it was just me in the whole gym. So I would safely throw a few skills. And then we got to come back to LA, and we had very small and structured practices. Some of them occurred outside in this built gym. I credit my coaches, Steve and Irina, just with working so hard to like make this occur. It was so difficult to be able to do gymnastics. You're using chalk and you're sweating, and it's just like a very difficult sport. And then I went to Utah for like 2 weeks because the Utah legislation on COVID was lessened. So I was able to train, and I was going to college. So I just wanted to like make sure that I was doing the most that I could to be prepared when I went to Pittsburgh. In addition to that, my mom had a job in Utah. So we were killing two birds with one stone, but it was like a 3 location process to get back to doing gymnastics.
You mentioned that there was kind of an outside gym. Gymnastics is kind of an indoor sport. What problems did that pose that you otherwise wouldn't have to deal with?
I think that the biggest part about gymnastics that you don't think about is the equipment. When I was young, I had a beam in my house that I would use. And I remember I did a back tuck on it and I cracked it in half. And when you're doing real gymnastics and multiple acro series in a row, you can't really afford to have that happen. So we would just have like constant surveillance. We really weren't throwing a lot of skills, and it was really, really hard to be able to come back to being fully operative as a Division 1 athlete because you had had all of this time where the equipment just wasn't usable because it was the parking lot, and then it was a tarp, and then a gym floor padding, and then we would run or do whatever on top of that. But we weren't doing tumbling, it was just unsafe. So, like beam bar drills, things that were very simplified, a lot of conditioning, a lot of calisthenics, a lot of Zoom calls.
So, how hard was it to just stay sharp, not just physically sharp, but mentally sharp?
I definitely will say I've always struggled with the mental side of gymnastics more than I would have liked. So that was really difficult. But physically, I picked up surfing. So that was a good way to stay in shape. But I look back at videos and the physique that you get from doing all of these pounding exercises all the time, constantly for like 6 hours a day, every single day, Monday through Saturday. So when you go to zero, it's just a completely different switch. So I picked up surfing. I started doing a lot of photography. I was working out a ton. So my physicality didn't really suffer, but I definitely was doing a lot.
Interesting that you mentioned surfing. So, do any of your gymnastic skills transfer over to the surfing world to make it easier to learn how to do that?
Actually, yes, thanks to my collegiate strength coach. I think now when I go home, surfing is so much easier because we're doing all of these crazy, like weighted pull ups and med ball throws and those things that I wasn't doing before because you're basically just doing calisthenic training when you're in Junior Olympics. But honestly, the only thing is balance. I think that I wasn't much better than like a 7-year-old who just started surfing for the first time.
I'm sure you're familiar with fellow Californian Tony Hawk, but his brother Steve, who I had on the show,
Yeah.
was also a surfer.
My parents, who will listen to this in due time, will laugh, but they never let me learn how to skateboard as soon as I like got good enough at gymnastics, where it was like, okay, she's probably going to go to college, so she can't like break her wrists. But I wanted to skateboard so badly, and I'm convinced that when I'm done with gymnastics, even though I'll be like, God, I'll be 23, that I'm going to learn how to skateboard and I will be a better surfer.
That would be kind of interesting. Being in DC, you could skateboard down Pennsylvania Avenue.
A lot of people do. You'll see people skateboarding in their business attire coming from the Capitol or State Department or wherever.
Taking a bit of a step back here, how did your interest in gymnastics first get piqued?
It was my mom's decision. I played a ton of sports. I did ballet, soccer, and gymnastics. And I started gymnastics when I was 3, but I was doing backflips in the yard before that. And like every other gymnast will tell you, those darn 2008 Olympic Games, John Johnson and Nastia Liukin, they really got me into gymnastics. That was when I was 5. I definitely wasn't that good in the beginning, but I decided that's what I was going to do.
You mentioned Nastia Liukin. Who else in the gymnastic world do you look up to for a little bit of inspiration?
I mean, I definitely look up to the legends now, but I think looking back to when I was a kid, I loved watching Carly Patterson. I loved watching Svetlana Korkina. Bridget Sloan had amazing lines when she went to the University of Florida, and I used to always love watching her. Samantha Peshek, who now is an ESPN broadcaster and has a ton of different corporations in her name, and she's an awesome businesswoman. She was amazing to watch as a kid. But my all-time classic was Vanessa Zamaripa, who was a UCLA gymnast. I loved watching UCLA and just the way they had fun and did everything. And I love the way the announcer said her name. He like rolled the R every time and it boomed through Polly. And it was just awesome. I would always go with my dad. And I loved watching her. Those were definitely my standouts.
Most people, when they think of Poly Pavilion, they think of basketball. But the gymnastics tradition at UCLA is no slouch either.
Absolutely. My sister goes there, and my best friend did gymnastics there, and she had the best time competing there.
Was UCLA ever on your radar in the recruiting process?
It was. I think that I always wanted to go to the East Coast. I always wanted to be near my grandfather's legacy and see why he had spent so much time over here and why my dad had been born in Chicago. I always wanted to come back to that part of their lives because it wasn't my life yet. So it wasn't on my radar really when I was looking at schools, but it definitely was on my radar after I committed because I realized that I had basically signed 4 years of my life to go spend 3,000 miles away from my family. So I didn't look at it when I was being recruited, but I definitely should have. I think that having Chris as my club coach was really influential because I got to see people get recruited onto that team and see his coaching style within our gym. But now looking back, I definitely kick myself a little bit.
Was there any kind of pressure when you got to Pittsburgh, knowing how big of a shadow your grandfather had to live up to the last name?
Oh my gosh, yes. There was definitely a lot of internal pressure for me. I don't know if I would say that there was a ton of pressure coming from the outside. I remember within my first 6 months at Pitt, I had had a news interview done on me, but it was right after I was coming back from a pretty bad concussion. So they were filming me, but I wasn't doing all my skills, and I felt so guilty because it wasn't my legacy and I wasn't presenting it well, if that makes sense, because I was like rehabbing this brain injury that I had never had. And I never realized the capacity and like just how difficult it is to come back from a concussion until that happen to me. So having the TV crew come in and then the rebuttal from my coaches following that, it was just a lot. I didn't realize how much I'm going to have to coach myself through this.
I would imagine in Pittsburgh, the name kind of opens up a little bit of doors for you and probably brought a little bit of publicity, I would imagine, to the Pittsburgh program when you got there.
It was awesome. I definitely think it was the first thing. It was like, this is Nancy Kiner. She's Rolf Kiner's granddaughter, which I love and I still do now. But I unfortunately was injured for a lot of that year for a multitude of reasons. But when I was coming back from my concussion, a lot of the physical therapists where I was doing vestibular therapy would come up to me and ask if my last name Kiner was the real Kiner. So that was awesome. And it was amazing to just tell them to come to the meets. And I hope they came, but they looked pretty full to me from the floor, but I don't know.
Has it been a little difficult to kind of create your own identity?
I don't think that it's been super difficult because my grandfather's identity is so expansive and his legacy in baseball also expands into digital media and broadcasting. So I definitely wanted to make my own legacy for myself. I think that's one of the reasons why I chose such a niche sport like gymnastics when I could have easily just done softball or like something else that wouldn't have cost my parents a fortune. But I decided that I was going to be a gymnast, and my choice to do the things that I do now definitely pans into that and goes into this idea that you want to be bigger than the person and the relatives that came before you, but you never want to disrespect them. And I will always want to make my grandfather proud, but I don't really think I struggle with it because I loved him and loved by so many people. I would like to be known and loved by that many people. But yeah, I guess maybe for Nancy and not for like Ralph Kiner's granddaughter, but it's cool.
Well, as someone who has met your grandfather, this is kind of cool for me because to see his legacy live on. And I met him at a bat dinner in 2002 in New York, and man, he was funny. He could have been a stand-up comedian if he wasn't in baseball or a commentator.
I like to rewatch his broadcasts. His one-liners are hilarious, but yeah, it's so amazing that you got to meet him. That's the year before I was born, so that's amazing.
You know his story about having to take the pay cut with the Pirates, right?
I don't know. I've heard so many different stories.
He walked into then GM Branch Rickey's office, and he had had a year where he had increased his homers, RBI, and batting average. And he'd had an agreement that if he did that, he would get a $500 raise, which speaks to how different salaries were in that era. But he said that Mr. Rickey looked at him and he says, "Son, what position did we finish?" And he's like, "Well, sir, we finished last." Mr. Rickey said, "And we can finish last without you." So Ralph said, "I took the pay cut."
That's a funny one. But him and Branch had a really interesting and funny relationship. My dad talks a lot about that. They have some great photos together. He loved his time with the Pirates. I know that.
Growing up with your sister, did you guys ever get competitive? Because I would imagine, as many sisters do, that might have happened.
Definitely. I mean, you talk about making your own legacy. I think that my family being a massive sports family, my sister is a recording artist. She's verified on Spotify. She definitely wanted to make her own legacy, but probably took all of the humor that the Kiner family had to offer and put it in her lovely, witty little jokes.
What's your favorite story with you and your sister about being competitive?
Oh, that's a really good question. We didn't have any brothers, so I was an athlete, and my sister wasn't an athlete, and she was my younger sister. And so there were a few times where I probably pushed her too hard and maybe sent her to the emergency room twice. And that definitely was probably the time when I realized I needed to chill out. But we were very competitive. I think it's hard to come up with a story because our expertises and our careers are so different. We're both very high achieving, but she has her own thing.
With your sister being involved in music, are you as big of a music person as she is?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
If you had to say a favorite artist or a favorite band that you're turning on to either listen to or get yourself hyped up for a meet, who is that?
To get myself hyped up for me, I'm listening to a lot of rap, but if I'm going to put on a favorite of all time, I really like the grunge era in the 90s and 2000s. So Nirvana, Pearl Jam, really just any Nirvana album is really great from that time. Definitely like Smells Like Teen Spirit or Brain Stew.
What resonates with you about Nirvana and particularly Kurt Cobain?
I think it definitely goes kind of back to what you were saying earlier about like making your own legacy. I have struggled with mental health as a lot of other athletes and high competitive achieving women do. And I think that the choice to fully envelop yourself in your art as whatever it may be and whatever that may look like was just really enticing to me when I was coming in as a freshman in college. I really just began to understand him as an artist, almost in his lack of artistic ability that became this huge sensation. And I really like that idea that you just have this style that is unapologetic.
And I hear maybe you named your cat after him as well.
Yeah, I did. I named my black cat after Kurt Cobain. It was fitting. I got him when I was at Pittsburgh. So it was like I was in the grunge city and I had this black cat and I was like, what am I going to name him? His name was Ash before or something like that. And I was like, no, he's going to be random. He's going to be Kurt Cobain. And only one person has ever been like, is that Kurt Cobain from Nirvana? Most of the time they just say, oh, that's a cool name.
My girlfriend, who has a black cat, will love to hear that and is a big music fan as well.
He definitely wears the title proudly, and my sister will play him a lot of Nirvana and likes to think that he does, in fact, listen and resonate with the lyrics.
You mentioned a little bit about mental health, which is something that's talked about a lot more in athletics than in any prior generation. What advice do you have for young and up and coming athletes to deal with some of those mental challenges?
I definitely think that I was really ashamed of my mental health struggles when I was younger, and I used to tell my mom that I was like insane or use these like horrible terms to describe myself because it was inappropriate to use, but it was also just demeaning of myself at the time. And I think that something that I always remember looking at was this girl who I actually got to do college with named Kendall Whitman. And she just graduated from GW. And she only did front passes because she didn't like going backwards. And that was like unheard of at the time. And she was amazing. She had 3 skills named after her. And I remember going to the gym and I was like, I'm going to only do front passes because I hated going backwards. And I was determined to make these things work for myself, even though they were inconvenient for others. And they were inconvenient for me. And I had to set up extra drills. And I had to do extra things. And I think a lot of time you will feel shame pushing through that and just having anyone like a supportive coach just to be able to teach kids in the best way possible because not everyone is the same and like learning how to be the best version and the best supporter for every athlete is just very different. But I think just being patient and allowing yourself to have those mistakes, I wish I would have been a little kinder to myself.
And speaking of mental health, coming off of a concussion, how hard was it for you, not just physically, but on the mental side, to get back out there and do the same thing you were doing when you got hurt?
I definitely had to make some changes after I got my concussion. I actually got hurt immediately after coming back from my concussion. So coming back from like a double injury was really, really difficult. I realized that the environment that I was in wasn't conducive to my personal growth and it wasn't helpful to me as an athlete. So I had to make a lot of difficult decisions in terms of seeing outside help, either in like physical therapy or actual therapy. I did a lot of yoga. I would do a lot of walks, swim workouts all the time with one of our amazing trainers at Pitt named Tony, who like loved my grandfather. And I think that's one of the reasons that he was so kind to me. And I appreciate him to this day, but so many swim workouts that I probably will never, thankfully, have to do again. But just a lot of vestibular therapy. I didn't even know that was a thing before I had my concussion, because I was approaching athletics not only as this thing I chose to do after school, like now this was my job. And now this was almost what I was employed to do, and I needed to be good at it again as fast as possible.
Was the double injury, I guess, an early reason that you decided to transfer to GW?
I definitely think that that contributed to it.
What was the transfer process like for you, and how did you end up choosing GW as the place for you?
I was being recruited by GW and a few other schools when I was in high school. So I knew the coaching staff and my current head coach, Stephanie, and my previous head coach, Margie. And I remember I was just cold calling schools, and it was probably the most stressful thing I hope I ever have to do. And basically just elevator pitching who I was as a human being and who I was as an athlete. I'll never forget calling UC Davis and having him go like, "Oh, we're known as UC different." And I was like, maybe that's not someplace I should go. Like at this point in my life, I don't know if that's something I need right now. But when I called Steph, I was in a parking lot across from my dorm, and it was 30 degrees outside, and I was at a poor place in my life, and she was very willing to talk to me as the athlete that I had been and the athlete that she knew that I was. And I really, really appreciated that. And even when I was talking to people who had recruited me before, there just wasn't the same faith in me as an athlete. And honestly, like Margie is and was an incredible coach. She's an incredible human being. So having her and Stephanie there is two really powerful women for my first 2 years at GW, and to recruit me back into a supportive collegiate environment was great, but it was really scary. So knowing that they were the people who were doing it as people that I had already talked to and people who I already had gotten to know was helpful. But I definitely trialed and errored a lot of schools. But I feel like I really need to enunciate how amazing Steph and Margie were. And even like Greg Ritchie, who's our baseball coach here and knew my grandfather, just how kind and compassionate the GW staff were. And even though it wasn't in my grandfather's city, they still treat me the same as I was in Pittsburgh. And I think that I definitely owe a lot to my coaches here at GW for making me the athlete and making my grandfather proud.
For people who haven't been to the GW campus, and I actually have been, I actually took a college tour there a lot of years ago. We're not going to say how long ago that was. But how would you describe the GW campus to people who may be interested in either just visiting or perhaps have a kid that might be a potential student there?
I would definitely say that it's very city integrated and it's brick filled. I love the campus. I think that while Pitt is awesome, Pittsburgh's a great city, the thing that I was missing is the city. And I love DC. It's an incredible place to be, young, old, middle age. There's things happening all the time here.
When you're not studying, practicing, taking pictures, is there anything around DC that you just like to go do or a place that you enjoy to hang out at?
I can walk to the White House. It's 10 minutes away. And I've really liked exploring Maryland since I spent this whole summer here, and I had never spent a summer here and not had a ton of things that I needed to be doing all the time. I was able to explore the M and the V, I guess, of the DMV. So I got to see Virginia and the extension of the Potomac and how far it goes. But I really loved Maryland, and I got to see my uncle and I got to go to Potomac, but I love Rock Creek Park. It's so green over there, and it's not green in LA. So honestly, anywhere that's green is really nice for me, but I love going over to Rock Creek.
Did you ever make it to Annapolis? That is a beautiful city.
I actually just went for a football game, and it was amazing. It was so pretty. It was beautiful. It's a city, obviously, but it reminded me of my hometown. It was giving like very town era vibes. but it was beautiful.
We've touched on it throughout the show, but not talked completely about it. How did your interest in photography initially blossom?
I had an amazing photography teacher named Mr. Reed in high school, and I took it as a summer class, and I had just been coming off of an injury. I either want to say I had hip surgery or I broke my wrist. They all kind of occurred at the same time. So I was coming off of one of those, and I didn't really know what I was going to start doing because I was not able to do gymnastics as much. And I really just loved photography, and I loved that it was something that I was able to actively create constantly. And it was like a reminder of where I was and who I had been 5 seconds ago. And then it was who I was now and all these just cool aspects of it. And I would take my camera to the gym, and that's like really my first identity as a sports photographer began as photographing at Olympia Gymnastics Center, photographing my teammates who we still look at the photos and they still come up. And I won a lot of prizes with those pictures, which was awesome. But that was the first time I was like, I'm good at this and it might be something I continue doing.
How did you end up getting some of your work into the El Segundo Museum of Art?
You mentioned that, and I was like, where did he find that? But they were having an exhibition where they said that you could enter your photographs, and the photos I had taken in the gym, I had just won off of those. And so my teacher, who was really this motivator for me putting my photography out there, was like, you should submit a photograph for this. You might not make it in, but you probably will. And so I submitted it and they accepted it, and I printed it and I matted it, and it went up in this exhibit, and it's the only time I've ever had my work exhibited. And I should have taken a picture with me next to it, but I was so awestruck to see it up on a wall for the first time that I just kind of forgot what I was doing.
That's pretty cool that you get your work displayed in a city museum of art.
It was awesome. It was a photo of my sister, so it was a cute moment, and I have the picture still. But ESMOA is amazing, and El Segundo as a whole just does a great job of fostering youth opportunity and youth creativity. And I definitely think that being from such a beautiful place and being from somewhere that even has like a town museum, that was really helpful to become a photographer, because I was like, there's a platform to do this, which doesn't exist for so many people.
Considering that you're from the LA area and the Olympics are there in 3 years, have you thought about trying to get credentialed for that?
I actually have. I would really love to get credentialed for that. And I need to find my network of photographers. It's like I've built a network of photographers on the East Coast, but now I'm going to go back to the West Coast and I'm going to have to rebuild it. So I'm hoping maybe like some other people come over to LA so that I can email them and just bother them as the annoying girl that I am and be like, hi, can you pretty please get me a media pass? I won't bother you one single time at all, and that's a lie, but I definitely have, and I need to figure out who I'm going to get it through, but I will be doing that.
Because of your work with the Nationals, have you thought about maybe trying to get credentialed for a World Series or a playoff series?
You're better at planning than I am. I probably should write that down in my like manifestation book, but I have. I think my dream team would be to work with the Dodgers. They have a beautiful stadium. They have a beautiful history of media and amazing history with the city and their Chicano ties to the city and their culture and the whole aspect of the Dodgers that is so deeply rooted in Los Angeles. I would love to work for a team. So I think I haven't really thought about working at the playoffs. I'm very much like, okay, let's get to that next step where we can afford to pay for possibly rent or like groceries. But I definitely would love to. I think it would be really fun to photograph the home run derby.
What intrigues you so much about the home run derby?
It's the ideas of gymnastics where you just get to do flips for a living. Like you're just hitting dingers. When I watched Bryce Harper, because he was my idol when I was growing up, I loved the Nationals. They were like my team. When he did the home run derby and his dad pitched to him, I just remember watching him and his face and his dad's expression and everyone's expression around him and all the young fans that go because it's such a spectator event. And it's really taking baseball down to the physicality aspect of it. Also, my grandfather, he was a slugger, and I really like that aspect of baseball. I think it's the most fun part.
I didn't realize you were a Nationals fan. What was it like to see him win the 2019 World Series?
Oh my God, it was amazing. I honestly think I cried. It was the coolest thing ever. I actually had an unofficial visit to GW that year, and so I went to see one of their games, and they unfortunately lost, but it was just the coolest environment, and it was the most packed I've ever seen the stadium to this day. It was so surreal, and everyone loves to hate a Nationals fan on the West Coast, so it was really nice.
Yeah, as a former Expos fan, they're not
Yes.
exactly high on my list.
It's really about the attitude and the community aspect. I don't know what it is that pulled me in as a kid. Maybe it was the logo looked like a little Walgreens sign, but I just was a die-hard Nats fan. And I would watch the games on our little kitchen TV all the time.
Getting the chance to work for them, that's gotta be pretty cool. I wish I had asked that earlier, but even though it was just 3 months, what was it like to work for the team that you grew up cheering for?
It was so surreal. I think that was honestly the best part for me. And the Nats have such a tight knit fan base. And me being from so far away, how could I possibly be a Nats fan? And I couldn't tell you, but it was amazing getting to work alongside Para, who I had watched generate the Baby Shark momentum and like all of that. He had been a part of the 2019 World Series and just getting to watch him work first base and ask me if I was okay and have like small conversational talk with him and players and just people who are involved in the organization all the time. Chris Johnson, the hitting coach, he was so kind to all the photographers. So being able to get to know the staff was just so surreal because you're getting to know the inner workings of this dream team that you've looked at. But I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. And I remember Nathaniel Lowe, he dabbed me up in the dugout one time and said that your photographs are so cool. And my jaw just dropped. And the assistant photographer, Amanda Cole, who works for them, she looked at me and was like, are you going to answer? Like, you need to. And I was so awestruck that one of them was talking to me and that we were on an equal level, that we could have this conversational talk about art and that he liked my double exposures and he loved my music photography. I remember calling my dad and being like, you'll never guess what happened. And he was like, he knows your photography account? And it was just awesome.
Well, as a fan of the 2023 Rangers and living in Dallas, being a longtime Rangers fan, hearing Nathaniel Lowe do that kind of warms the heart.
He's a great guy. All the photographers that I know will talk very highly of him because he is a photographer as well. But I was only there for a few months and he always would help us with the shot or would do a fun pose to try and like break the tension. Sometimes photography, when you're working and there's so many photographers and there's so many pro ball players and important people in a small space, it can be very chaotic and you feel really stressed. And that was my first time in that environment. And props to Amanda Bowen, who's my boss, and Amanda Cole, who works constantly with them. It was amazing to be able to watch them kind of like camouflage into this environment. But him like throwing up a peace sign or like smiling at my camera, it just did worlds of difference for me because I was this like 22-year-old girl who had never been on a major league ball field unless it was my dad to celebrate my grandfather. It was just really helpful and he was a great guy. And when I found out that he had a World Series ring, it just made him an even greater guy.
Did you get a chance to hold the World Series ring?
No, I've held Ted Lerner's before he passed, and it was the heaviest ring I felt.
One last question before I let you go here is looking ahead, and we've talked a little bit about it, but let's say 10, 15 years down the road, where do you see yourself?
Oh God, someone asked me that at a coffee the other day, and I literally just stared at the sky. I would like to be a photographer or a videographer or do something in creative media. And if I'm not doing that, I hope that you find me on LinkedIn and kick me. But I will be doing something in creative media. And I would like to be on the West Coast. And I would like to be an advocate and talk to young athletes and continue my experience as a gymnast. I think that my knowledge and the things that I have learned and have had to learn the hard way, I don't think that everyone needs to learn. So when I'm done with this, because I have one more year at GW, which I'm super excited about, I would like to hopefully give back to the gymnastics community that has shaped me. But I would like to be a photographer, videographer, hopefully back on the West Coast, maybe a little tanner than I am right now, and happy, I think, overall.
How important is it for you as an athlete to give back to the future athletes, be it in gymnastics or in any other sport?
It's really important to me because it's made me who I am today, and the girls and the young women and young athletes as a whole that I looked up to even on TV made me who I am. And I think that Simone Biles and her twisties, which is the actual professional term for it, happening on live TV was really important because it shows you how shattering and disastrous and demeaning having a mental block or having a mental setback in your sport can be. And it's ended so many people's careers, and it's ended a lot of people's love for the sport. And I don't think that sports are everything at all, but it's a lovely additive to life. And I think that it's really hard to watch young gymnasts get stressed about gymnastics because I always want them to be smiling, and I know that I wasn't.
Nancy, I want to thank you so much for coming on the I Played Too podcast today and talking about your gymnastics career, your budding photography career. I appreciate it so much. Good luck this season in your final year at GW and wherever your gymnastics and photography careers take you. Thank you again.
I can't thank you enough for taking the time to even find me and message me. I truly appreciate the effort, and this podcast is an amazing thing, and it highlights so many amazing people, and I really appreciate that you had me on, and thank you for talking to me and for giving me your time. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk soon, but thank you again.